Well, NATO is considering deployment of up to 300,000 troops to go to Poland to be on the border with Russia. Meanwhile, also, Poland's ambassador to France said in a recent interview that if Ukraine fails to defend itself, Poland would have to enter the war. So things are ramping up, not necessarily cooling down, that's for sure. 300,000 troops in Poland would be quite the escalation. Joining us now is geopolitical analyst and host of TNT on TNT Radio, Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Kim.
This would be escalating us definitely towards World War III, unless they have another reason for wanting to amass these 300,000 troops. What's the proposition here for this?
Well, the interesting thing is in what you just said, the words of the Polish ambassador to France. She said, if Ukraine fails to defend its independence, and therein lies the problem, is Ukraine really independent, or has it lost its sovereignty? Is it being directed in all ways, in all affairs, by Washington, by NATO, politically, economically, militarily? And that seems to be the case. So you have to kind of, frame it in that respect. The other thing is, will they have no choice? Again, Poland has a choice, but Washington was directing and leaning heavily on Poland. They're putting a lot of money in Poland. The U.S. wants to have permanent bases in Poland as well, with a bigger footprint of U.S. troops in Poland. So the Polish political elites are under a lot of pressure to kind of comply with this. And really, the U.S. and NATO have created a situation in Ukraine that's put a lot of undue pressure on countries like Poland and, of course, Finland and Sweden, pressuring them to kind of join NATO in order to get protection. The Baltic states as well, they're feeling a little bit insecure in that respect. And so where's Poland going to find these 300,000 troops? The standing military force for Poland on a good day going into this conflict would have been about 110, maybe 120,000 at a stretch. So they're talking about new recruits, or are they going to be basically adding on professionals, i.e. mercenary or BlackRock Academy, Wagner style, if you want to take the Russian equivalent there. So, I mean, that takes years. You can't just ramp up a national defense force from 120 to 300,000 overnight. You're talking like 5-10 years, that whole process. So what does that tell us? That tells us that whatever this plan is for the future of the post-war Ukraine or the post-armistice Ukraine, it's a long-term plan. The United States has long-term, protracted designs on Eastern Europe. And I think that's the big conversation.
Yeah, in order to get those troops there, we're definitely going to be drawing them from NATO. Obviously, is how that would happen. I know you're based in the UK. Something else interesting happened today, which is that Prince William went to Poland, and he tweeted out actually today, says, "This afternoon I traveled to Poland to meet British and Polish troops, where I heard about their extraordinary work in support of Ukraine. My message to all of them on behalf of us, thank you." So really, this is kind of news in a way, admitting that that NATO troops are in fact helping Ukraine. It's one thing to send weapons. It's one thing to send military aid, humanitarian aid. We've all suspected, and maybe there's even been some kind of sly verifications that NATO's been helping them with logistics, with intelligence. That is all. But now for even Prince William to take this trip to go and thank the troops, the British troops, the Polish troops, for their support, their work, their extraordinary work for Ukraine. I think there's some. Are we at war already without them declaring war? Are they doing a shadow war that we don't even know about? Seems like it.
Well, look, since this conflict began last year, in earnest last March 2022, the British government, the British Department of Defense, Ben Wallace, Defense Minister, they talk as if they're at war with Russia. And this is without any declaration of war. So this is the assumption, when you ban RT, the URL from ISPs within the UK, they're sanctioning journalists, Russian and British, Graham Phillips, British journalist sanctioned by Britain. Those are all sort of acts of war. Now, in terms of giving defense equipment, helping with logistics, 100%, reconnaissance, 100%. There's plenty of extemporaneous reporting about Polish troops in Kharkiv. I've seen estimates, multiple sources, up to 15,000. Okay, maybe not official in terms of flagged, but and so Poland is intimately involved in this conflict around Kharkiv, particularly, and that sort of the back behind the front in Donbass. So you've got that. You've got lots of mercenaries or people fighting in the Foreign Legion who are NATO troops, either on leave or they're veterans, or there's people with maybe minimal military experience, reserves, ex-reserves. So there's thousands of Western and NATO troops cycling through the battlefield in Ukraine. And not unlike, and I know this is going to hit a raw nerve for some people, not unlike the amount of foreign fighters that cycled through Syria of the jihadi variety from many, many different countries. So the West already have experience in mounting a proxy war, using foreign fighters, creating the international brigade sort of vibe in terms of recruitment. If you look at how ISIS and al-Nusra and in Syria, how they recruited, was that this was internationally, you're fighting fascism. This is the good fight. Bashar al-Assad represents evil. You need to fight the good fight. Exactly the same way they recruited people in the 1930s to fight in Franco Spain's the Spanish Civil War with the international brigades, drawing them from the U.S., from all the European countries, from all around the world, and then converging in to fight the good fight against the evil dictator Franco. So history repeats itself and rhymes many times, and so the West has a formula for this. The question is, on this front, if this entails expanding NATO, expanding the NATO footprint, expanding the U.S. footprint in Poland, what does this mean? It means that not only are we at war, but the U.S. and Britain that drive NATO, they want to push the new Iron Curtain further east. So the new border, rather than Germany post World War II, huge amount of British and American troops stationed in Germany, like at the peak, hundreds of thousands, much more than you have today. Although we have big facilities in Germany, listening stations, Ramstein, Stuttgart, NSA listening stations. All the drone warfare is controlled from Germany as well. And so not only that, but pushing the military side further east. So if you think about it from a Washington point of view, if you don't see a military win in this current conflict in Ukraine, then you have to go back to your public, to your voters, and justify all the money you've been giving Zelensky and Ukraine, and all the arms, all the political capital that's been expended, the insecurity of pushing the world to the precipice of World War III. And you have to go back with the win. So what's the win? The win has to be an expanded U.S. and NATO presence on the border, closer to Russia, and an expansion of NATO. Now, they might have both of those things.
Yeah, so you're saying that Poland would be the new Germany in a way, where they're starting to amass those troops and having that base there. So I guess this could go one of two ways with this new amassing of troops in Poland that they're proposing, these 300,000 troops, and that would be either on the most optimistic, I think, scenario is that it's like Germany, where they just have these bases there. And, they just have bases there. And then many of us Americans wonder, why do we still have bases in Germany? What's the point? The worst scenario, obviously, is that that these troops will do more than just sit there on a base, but that they will be directed to go in there and fight a war, and that we will end up in World War III. And I think that if we do have troops already in there secretly, which I think many of us suspect that there are, and as you've mentioned, that there are already troops that are there fighting. We are already in World War III. We just haven't declared it. It just hasn't been official. But we've seen, the provocations. Russia clearly thinks we're there. I mean, or they're at least behaving the way that they behaved around the drone recently in the Black Sea was very much akin to how the United States treats Iranian drones. Right? We view you as hostile, and we're going to treat your drone like it's hostile. And that, whereas typically both countries have even, I mean, with Operation Open Skies, I mean, we fly planes over each other's countries looking at each other. But now things are clearly changed. The temperature has definitely gone up. And so they're treating us a bit more like we're hostile. That would make sense if we have troops there actually behaving like it's already World War III. I'm getting nervous. I was hoping that maybe that things would de-escalate. But with this news and with Prince William going into the Poland thanking troops for their work with Ukraine, I don't understand that. It does feel like, and I think people forget wars don't happen overnight, right? I mean, world wars don't happen overnight. When you read the history books, they take years for countries to get into them. And it does feel like there is no way out. Like you mentioned, they're going to have to account for all the spending. They're going to have to say, well, it was for a good reason and why. And ultimately, if it leads us into world war, then they would say, well, see, this is why we were bound to go to war. And so this is what we had to do. We were preparing. Boy, this is really getting scary. Do you think we're going to end up in World War III?
Well, you said we're already in it. So, no, I know what you mean. A shooting war, a shooting war. Look, it's really dangerous because, best laid plans of mice and men. I'm sure the planners, I'm sure the Rand Corporation has done many different scenarios to game out all the different iterations of how a conflict could unfold, how to contain things from spilling over into Europe, how to limit the damage. All of these things are wonderful in theory, but in practice, we have a thing called politics, and politics sometimes compels men and women to do things that aren't rational at the time. And when you bring the conflict to such a head as it is now, the risk of a mistake, or misunderstanding in the Black Sea, for instance, what happened with this U.S. Reaper drone is potentially minor, but compare this to what happened in 2019 between the United States and Iran. So Iran shot down a U.S. Global Hawk drone,
Mm-hmm.
and guess what? The U.S. wasn't able to do anything at the time because they didn't have a strategic advantage. And then Iran hit two U.S. bases in Iraq, destroyed them, and a third facility, I believe, in Iraqi Kurdistan. And guess what? The U.S. couldn't respond. So what would the political cost be if that same situation happened around Ukraine for the U.S., for Britain to want to save face, deploying the royal family to go, motivate the troops and make a statement in Poland shows you how committed
Yeah.
Britain is to this war. And listen, the biggest misnomer people have after the Iraq War in 2003 was this image of Blair as George Bush's poodle. Okay. And I tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at this strident rhetoric coming out of British government, of Westminster, constantly, whenever it looks like Washington is wavering, or the new congressional Congress led by Speaker McCarthy is sworn in January, who flies into the U.S. to give a pep talk and a speaking tour? Boris Johnson. It's the same Boris Johnson that flew into Kiev to make sure there wasn't going to be any peace talks a year ago. So Britain is the brains and America is the muscle. And the Anglo-American partnership, although testy at times, they work together, they move together, they share intelligence, they support each other. And that is the core of NATO. NATO is Britain and the US, and everybody else is along for the ride, or they're going to be made to go along for the ride. And that's just the way it's been since the end of Second World War, that NATO is the glove in which America can insert its hand to steer European political and military and geopolitical affairs. That's why NATO exists. That's why the Secretary General of NATO, British Lord Hastings Ismay, in 1952, he said, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Germans down and the Russians out of Europe and America in Europe. That's the purpose of NATO. So that's what the first Secretary General said. Has
Yeah.
anything changed? Has anything changed?
Yeah, and it's amazing that, I don't understand the logic of Finland and Sweden wanting to join in on this. There's for protection. No, 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 no. They're wanting you to join in because they want the bodies. They want the troops. And they want you to join in on that. It's kind of like a, well, it's only fair if everyone else has to send their troops, you have to as well. It's more about that than it is about their safety. It's not about that at all.
No,
That's why I just can't believe that they're signing up for it. But they must be
it's
feeling pressured.
it's very much so, very much so. It's more like, Kim, a protection racket.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. It's a protection racket, and the idea is that the dominant countries like the U.S. will convince first all the Eastern European countries to liquidate all their old military stocks, turn them into scrap metal in Ukraine, and then backfill them with brand new, shiny, latest state of the art gear from the U.S. or Britain or whatever NATO country is supplying them. And so that's really good for defense. We're seeing the militarization of everything, of space, satellites, the airwaves, the internet. The internet's now, as you know from the DHS Twitter files, I think you spoke to Matt Taibbi recently on
Hmm.
this, completely weaponizing and militarizing the entire social media space, calling it essential election infrastructure, and that any disinformation on these platforms is deemed as a national threat. Like this is full on. This is fifth generation warfare to a level that is hard to even conceive. What else is not going to be militarized? That's the question.
Patrick, thank you so much for being here and giving us some insight into what is going on, this new escalation, really, ultimately. So, scary, scary times, but thank you for being here, Patrick Henningsen, with TNT Radio and also a geopolitical analyst and journalist. Where can people find your work?
Well, 21stcenturywire.com, that's my home website. We've been going for about 10 years, and we do a radio show every Sunday there called The Sunday Wire. I'm also a co-presenter at the ukcolumn.org, and that's Friday. I'm on live at 1 p.m. That's television every Friday. And that's a UK alternative media outlet. So yeah,
Oh, great.
TNT, Monday to Friday, Sundays at Sunday Wire, and Fridays at UK Column.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.